The worst cries are never the loudest, people used to say in Seoul's underground world. Kang Min-jae never believed that until the little girl grabbed his coat in the middle of the ring. The neon lights of Gangnam reflected across the black pavement like broken glass as Min-jae stepped out of the Imperial Jade Casino, surrounded by 6 bodyguards in charcoal suits. Midnight rain poured from the sky in silver sheets, soaking the sidewalks, washing cigarette ash into the gutters, turning the city into a blur of red brake lights and shimmering reflections. Men twice Min-jae's size lowered their eyes when he walked past. Rivals crossed the street to avoid him. Even police officers pretended not to notice his convoy. At 34 years old, Kang Min-jae ruled an empire built on fear, silence, and favors powerful men could never admit needing. His tailored black overcoat probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the silver watch beneath his sleeve had once belonged to a politician who mysteriously disappeared 3 winters ago. Min-jae moved through the storm without emotion, one hand in his pocket, dark eyes unreadable beneath the city lights. Then suddenly someone crashed into him. The bodyguards reacted instantly. "Boss!" A small figure wrapped trembling fingers around Min-jae's coat before security could pull her away. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her soaked sweater clung to her tiny frame, and her sneakers were falling apart at the seams. Wet strands of black hair stuck to her cheeks as she looked up at him with terrified eyes far too old for a child. "Please," she cried, struggling to breathe. "They're going to kill my mom." The entire sidewalk froze. Han Tae-woo stepped forward immediately, his voice sharp. "Get her away from him." But Min-jae didn't move. Rain dripped from the girl's eyelashes as she clutched his coat tighter with shaking hands. That was when he saw it. Blood smeared across her tiny fingers. Not much, just enough to make something cold settle in the pit of his stomach. Somewhere across the street, a black SUV slowed near the curb. Tae-woo noticed it instantly. His posture changed. "Boss," he warned quietly. "We need to leave now." The little girl turned in panic the moment she saw the vehicle. Her entire body stiffened like prey spotting a predator. "Please don't let them take me back," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word. Min-jae studied her silently. In his world, traps came wrapped in innocent faces all the time. Women crying, children abandoned, old men begging for mercy. Compassion got people buried. He had learned that lesson at 14 years old, standing beside his mother's hospital bed while loan sharks laughed in the hallway outside. But something about this child felt real. Maybe it was the way her knees trembled uncontrollably. Maybe it was the terror in her eyes. Or maybe it was because even through the rain, Min-jae could hear the sound of her teeth chattering. The SUV door opened halfway. 2 men stepped onto the sidewalk wearing dark jackets despite the weather. They weren't running. Men who knew they had power never ran. Tae-woo's hand drifted toward the inside of his coat. "Boss." Min-jae's expression hardened slightly. The little girl looked up at him one more time, desperate enough to trust the most feared man in Seoul. "My mom told me if I ever got lost," she whispered, "to find someone scarier than the bad people." For the first time in years, Kang Min-jae felt something shift inside his chest. Then the men across the street started walking toward them. The 2 men crossing the street moved with the calm confidence of people who had done this before. Rain rolled off their black jackets as traffic hissed through the wet Seoul intersection behind them. One of them spoke quietly into an earpiece, while keeping his eyes locked on the little girl hiding behind Kang Min-jae's coat. Eun-ji buried her face against the expensive fabric, trembling so hard Min-jae could feel it through the layers of wool. "Boss," Han Tae-woo said again, his voice low and tense. "This is not random." Min-jae already knew that. Nothing in his world was random. Not at 1 in the morning. Not outside one of his casinos. And definitely not a terrified child with blood on her hands. The taller man stopped several feet away and forced a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "Our niece wandered off," he said smoothly. "Thank you for finding her." Eun-ji immediately shook her head against Min-jae's side. "No," she whispered. "They work for him." Min-jae looked down at her. "For who?" The girl hesitated, fear flickering across her face like lightning. "Chairman Beck." The name changed everything. Even Tae-woo stiffened beside him. Chairman Beck Dushik was not just another businessman. He was old money wrapped in political influence, the kind of man television stations bowed to and prosecutors avoided. Officially, he ran shipping companies across Asia. Unofficially, Everyone in Seoul's underground world knew he owned far darker things. Min Jae's expression remained unreadable, but something cold settled behind his eyes. Across the street, more headlights appeared through the rain. Another black vehicle. The man forced another smile. The child is confused. Her mother works for Chairman Beck. There was an accident tonight. We are simply taking her somewhere safe. Eun-ji grabbed Min Jae tighter. They hurt my mom, she cried softly. I heard her screaming. Silence spread beneath the casino awning. Even the rain suddenly sounded louder. Min Jae studied the men carefully. Expensive shoes. Corporate watches. Calm posture. Not street thugs. Clean-up people. The kind powerful men used when they wanted problems erased quietly. Tae-woo leaned closer. We should leave, he murmured. If Beck is involved, this becomes political. But Min Jae barely heard him, because the little girl's voice had unlocked something he hated remembering. 20 years ago, he had stood in another rainstorm outside another building while strangers dragged his mother away over unpaid debts. He still remembered the sound of her crying his name while he stood frozen at 14 years old, powerless to stop it. That memory had built the man he became. Ruthless, untouchable, empty. Min Jae slowly crouched until he was eye level with Eun-ji. Where is your mother now? The girl struggled to breathe steadily. At the docks, she whispered. Warehouse 17. They said she saw something she should not have seen. Tae-woo cursed under his breath. The taller man's polite expression finally cracked. Sir, he said carefully. With respect, this matter does not concern you. Min Jae rose slowly to his full height. Rain slid from his dark hair onto the collar of his coat as his eyes settled on the man speaking. Every bodyguard behind him went completely still. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. A child ran to me for help, Min Jae said quietly. Now it concerns me. The man's jaw tightened. Chairman Beck will not appreciate interference. Min Jae slipped one hand into his pocket and gave the faintest smile. It was the kind of smile that made grown men lose sleep. Then tonight, he said softly, Chairman Beck can learn disappointment. No one spoke for several seconds after Kang Min Jae's words cut through the rain. The men sent by Chairman Beck exchanged quick glances, uncertain for the first time since arriving. In Seoul, people threaten each other every day. But Min Jae was not a man who made threats. He made decisions. The taller man forced a careful smile again, though tension now sharpened his face. This misunderstanding does not need to become larger than it already is. Min Jae ignored him completely. Instead, he looked toward Han Tae-woo. Bring the car. Tae-woo hesitated. That alone was rare. Boss, he said quietly. If we move against Beck tonight, there is no clean way back from it. Min Jae slid his gaze toward the black SUV idling across the street. More silhouettes were visible behind the tinted windows now. Watching, waiting, calculating. There stopped being a clean way back, Min Jae replied softly, the moment they involved a child. The casino doors opened behind them as guests spilled into the night beneath umbrellas carried by hotel staff. Laughter drifted briefly through the rain before disappearing into the tension hanging over the sidewalk. Min Jae rested one hand lightly on Eun-ji's shoulder. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed when he guided her toward the armored sedan waiting at the curb. Tae-woo opened the rear door himself. Get in, he said gently, surprising even his own men with the softness in his voice. Eun-ji climbed into the leather back seat clutching a faded pink backpack so tightly her knuckles looked pale beneath the rainwater. Min Jae followed beside her while 4 bodyguards immediately formed a barrier around the vehicle. The men working for Chairman Beck did not move closer. They understood the line they had reached. Inside the car, warm air replaced the cold rain almost instantly. Seoul's neon skyline blurred beyond the tinted windows as the engine hummed quietly beneath them. Eun-ji sat perfectly still beside Min Jae, her small sneakers dripping water onto the expensive floor mats. She looked painfully out of place inside a vehicle built for kings, politicians, and dangerous men. Min Jae loosened the cuff of his black gloves and studied her silently. Up close, she looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes. Tiny scratches along one wrist. A child who had been running for far too long. Tae-woo climbed into the front passenger seat and looked back carefully. We can still hand her to the police, he said. Officially. Eun-ji immediately shook her head. No police, she whispered. Mom said they work for Chairman Beck too. Silence settled heavily inside the car. Min-jae believed her. Men like Beck survived because too many important people owed them favors. That was the real power in Seoul. Not money. Not guns. Secrets. The sedan pulled away from the casino, tires slicing through puddles as the city lights streaked across the windows like liquid gold. Eun-ji slowly looked toward Min-jae. "Are you really scary?" she asked suddenly. Tae-woo nearly turned around in shock. No one spoke to Kang Min-jae that way. But the little girl's voice carried no disrespect. Only honest curiosity. Min-jae stared ahead calmly. People seemed to think so. Eun-ji considered that answer carefully before nodding once. "Good," she whispered. "Because my mom said scary people are the only ones bad men listen to." Something shifted in the car after that. Something quiet. Tae-woo noticed it immediately in the rearview mirror. The boss who normally hated unnecessary problems had not once asked to abandon the situation. Not once. Min-jae finally looked down at the little girl beside him. "Tell me exactly what your mother saw." "Tonight." Eun-ji swallowed hard. Her fingers tightened around the pink backpack resting on her lap. "She found videos," she whispered. "Children inside shipping containers." The entire car went silent. The silence inside the armored sedan lasted nearly 10 seconds after Eun-ji's whisper. Children inside shipping containers. Even in Kang Min-jae's world, there were lines that carried a different kind of darkness. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows as the city rushed past outside in streaks of neon blue and crimson red. Han Tae-woo slowly turned halfway in his seat. "Are you certain?" he asked carefully. Eun-ji nodded immediately. "Mom was cleaning Chairman Beck's office," she said quietly. She heard people arguing. Then she found a hidden room behind the bookshelf. Her small fingers tightened around the faded pink backpack on her lap. There were screens everywhere. Min-jae's expression did not change, but Tae-woo had worked beside him for 11 years. He recognized the dangerous stillness settling across his boss's face. It was the same silence that appeared before entire organizations disappeared from Seoul overnight. "What happened after your mother found the videos?" Min-jae asked. Eun-ji looked down at her soaked sneakers. "Someone saw her." Her voice trembled slightly now. "Mom grabbed me after school and told me we had to run." The sedan turned onto the highway leading toward the Han River. Rain shimmered across the bridge rails while Seoul's skyline glowed through the storm like another world entirely. Massive digital billboards reflected across the water below, beautiful and cold at the same time. Min-jae looked out the window without really seeing the city. Chairman Beck had always been careful. Too careful. Men feared him because nothing ugly ever touched his public image. Charity events. Political donations. Expensive smiles beside television anchors. But Min-jae had spent his entire life around predators. He knew evil rarely looked monstrous from the outside. Sometimes it wore tailored suits and attended galas. Tae-woo finally exhaled slowly. "Warehouse 17 is inside Beck shipping territory," he said. "Private docks. Private security. Cameras everywhere." "How long until we get there?" Min-jae asked. 20 minutes. Eun-ji suddenly leaned forward between the seats. "Please hurry," she whispered. "They said if Mom did not tell them where the hard drive was before sunrise, they would make her disappear." The words landed heavily inside the car. A child should never know phrases like that. Min-jae noticed the way Eun-ji kept glancing toward the rear window every few seconds. Like she expected someone to appear behind them at any moment. "You are safe in this car," he said calmly. The little girl looked at him carefully, as if trying to decide whether men like him could really tell the truth. "People say you are dangerous," she whispered. Tae-woo almost smiled despite the tension. Seoul newspapers called Kang Min-jae many things. Ruthless, untouchable, the devil of Gangnam. But hearing it from a frightened 8-year-old felt strangely different. Min-jae loosened the cuff of his black coat and answered honestly. "Sometimes." Eun-ji studied him for another second before slowly reaching into her backpack. Tae-woo immediately stiffened. "Easy," Min-jae said quietly. The girl pulled out a silver flash drive attached to a tiny cartoon rabbit keychain. "Mom told me if anything happened," she whispered. "I had to protect this." The moment Tae-woo saw it, his face changed completely. "Boss," he said carefully. "If those videos are real, Beck will burn half the city down trying to get this back." Min-jae took the flash drive slowly from Eun-ji's trembling hand. Small, lightweight, ordinary looking. Yet suddenly it felt heavier than anything he had touched in years. Outside, thunder rolled across the river as the sedan disappeared deeper into the storm toward the docks of Busan Harbor. Busan Harbor looked like another country at 3 in the morning. Endless rows of shipping containers towered beneath industrial floodlights, while thick fog rolled in from the water, swallowing entire sections of the docks in pale gray shadows. Cargo cranes stretched across the skyline like giant steel skeletons, unmoving against the storm clouds above. The armored sedan slowed near an abandoned customs building overlooking Pier 17. Kang Min-jae stepped out first, his black coat shifting in the cold ocean wind as rain mist settled across the concrete. Behind him, bodyguards moved quickly into position, scanning rooftops, loading bays, and container rows with silent precision. Han Tae-woo approached with a tablet displaying security layouts hacked from the harbor system. Warehouse 17 is ahead, he said quietly. Private generators. Independent cameras. Beck locked the entire pier down 2 hours ago. Min-jae studied the distant building through the fog. Massive steel doors. Minimal lighting. No visible workers. Too quiet for a shipping dock. How many inside? Tae-woo answered carefully. At least 12. Eun-ji stepped from the sedan, clutching her backpack against her chest. Her small face looked pale beneath the harbor lights, but she still pointed toward the warehouse with trembling certainty. That is where they took her. Tae-woo immediately crouched beside her. You stay here with the drivers. The little girl shook her head hard enough to send wet strands of hair across her cheeks. No. If my mom hears my voice, she will know she is not alone. For a second, nobody answered. Min-jae looked down at her quietly. Fear still lived in the child's eyes, but something stronger sat beside it now. Loyalty. The kind children carried naturally before the world taught them selfishness. He had almost forgotten what that looked like. Finally, Min-jae removed his gloves and handed them to Tae-woo. Keep her close. Then he started walking toward the warehouse. The bodyguards followed immediately through the fog-covered dockyard, their footsteps muted against the rain-soaked pavement. Somewhere nearby, metal chains creaked softly against shipping cranes while waves crashed against the harbor walls below. The closer they moved toward Warehouse 17, the more Min-jae noticed the signs. Extra surveillance. Unmarked security vehicles. Armed men pretending to smoke near loading docks. Chairman Beck had not been protecting cargo tonight. He had been protecting secrets. Tae-woo touched his earpiece. Camera loop active. 90 seconds before they notice. Interference. Min-jae gave a single nod. Then the warehouse doors opened. Warm lights spilled into the cold harbor air as 2 guards stepped outside carrying coffee cups, laughing quietly about something neither of them would remember tomorrow. They froze the instant they saw Kang Min-jae standing in the fog. One of them nearly dropped his drink. Mr. Kang, he said nervously. Chairman Beck was not expecting visitors. Min-jae's dark eyes drifted past him into the warehouse interior. Clearly, his voice stayed calm. That frightened people more. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. Men loyal to Beck feared their boss. Men in Seoul feared Kang Min-jae differently, like people feared storms or fire. One guard swallowed hard. This is private property. Min-jae stepped closer slowly, expensive shoes splashing through shallow rainwater. Then why? He asked softly. Is there a terrified mother screaming inside? The laughter vanished from both guards immediately. Somewhere deeper in the warehouse, a metal chair scraped sharply across concrete. Eun-ji heard it too. Mom, she whispered. Her voice cracked apart in the cold harbor air. And for the first time that night, Kang Min-jae's expression turned genuinely dangerous. The 2 guards outside Warehouse 17 immediately stepped aside. Nobody ordered them to. Fear did it for them. Kang Min-jae walked through the massive steel doorway without slowing down, his dark coat trailing rainwater across the concrete floor while the harbor wind followed him inside. The warehouse smelled like salt, engine oil, and cold metal. Rows of shipping containers stretched into the shadows beneath industrial ceiling lights, but Min-jae's attention locked onto only one thing. A woman sat tied to a chair near the center of the room. Yoon So-ra looked exhausted. Her dark hair clung messily to her face, and her wrists were bound tightly behind the metal chair. One side of her cheek carried a fading bruise, but what struck Min-jae most was not fear in her eyes. It was determination. Even now, surrounded by men loyal to Chairman Beck, She looked like someone still refusing to surrender. 3 men stood nearby wearing expensive suits beneath long black coats. Corporate predators pretending to be businessmen. The oldest among them stepped forward slowly. "Mr. Kong," he said with careful politeness. "This situation does not involve you." Min-jae glanced once around the warehouse. Security cameras. Locked side doors. Workers avoiding eye contact. A room built for silence. "Untie her," he said calmly. The older man smiled nervously. Chairman Beck would not appreciate interference in internal matters. Behind Min-jae, Han Tae-woo quietly positioned men near every exit. Nobody raised voices. Nobody needed to. The tension inside the warehouse already felt heavy enough to break concrete. Then Eun-ji's small voice echoed through the building. "Mom." Every head turned. Soare's composure shattered instantly the moment she saw her daughter standing near the doorway wrapped in Tae-woo's oversized jacket. "Eun-ji." She struggled violently against the chair in pure panic. "Why is she here?" Tears filled her eyes immediately. "You should have run farther away." Eun-ji tried to rush toward her mother, but Tae-woo gently held her back. "Not yet." Min-jae watched the entire moment in silence. The fear in Soare's face was not for herself. It was entirely for her child. Something about that pierced deeper than he expected. Because once upon a time, his own mother had looked at him with that exact same desperation while shielding him from men much crueler than poverty. The older man stepped closer to Min-jae and lowered his voice. "This woman stole confidential property from Chairman Beck." Soare looked up sharply despite her exhaustion. "Those were children," she said hoarsely. "Not property." Silence swept through the warehouse. Even some of Beck's own workers lowered their eyes. Soare's breathing shook as she looked directly at Min-jae for the first time. "I know who you are," she whispered. "But if you still have any humanity left, please get my daughter away from these people." Min-jae stared at her quietly. Humanity. Nobody had used that word around him in years. In Seoul's underground world, men called him powerful, dangerous, untouchable, but never human. He slowly removed his black gloves one finger at a time before stepping towards Soare himself. The older man immediately moved into his path. "Mr. Kong," he warned carefully. Chairman Beck personally ordered. Min-jae stopped directly in front of him. "Move." One word. Quiet. Controlled. Yet the entire warehouse seemed to freeze around it. The man hesitated only a second before stepping aside. Min-jae reached down and calmly loosened the restraints binding Soare's wrists. The ropes hit the concrete floor softly. Soare stared at him in disbelief while rubbing her swollen hands. Behind them, Eun-ji burst into tears and ran forward the instant Tae-woo released her. Mother and daughter collided together beside the chair, holding each other so tightly it looked like they were trying to survive the world through sheer force alone. And standing there beneath the cold warehouse lights, Kang Min-jae felt something inside him begin to crack. For several seconds, nobody inside warehouse 17 moved. The only sound came from Eun-ji crying softly against her mother's shoulder while rain hammered the metal roof above them. Yoon Soare held her daughter so tightly it looked painful, as if letting go for even 1 second might allow the world to steal her child away again. Kang Min-jae stood a few feet away watching them in silence. Something about the scene felt unfamiliar to him. Too honest. Too human. In his world, people hugged for cameras, lied for survival, and betrayed each other for money. But this was different. Raw fear. Real love. The kind no amount of power could fake. Han Tae-woo stepped carefully beside him. "Boss," he murmured. "We intercepted radio traffic outside. More of Beck's people are moving toward the harbor." Min-jae nodded once without taking his eyes off Soare and her daughter. "How long?" 10 minutes. Maybe less. The older man working for Chairman Beck slowly straightened his coat, trying to recover some authority. "You are making a serious mistake tonight," he warned. Chairman Beck built half the financial systems in this city. Soare looked up immediately from beside the chair. "And buried children under the other half," she whispered bitterly. The warehouse fell silent again. Min-jae finally turned toward her fully. "Tell me everything." Soare hesitated. Years of fear lived behind her eyes now. Fear of powerful men. Fear of disappearing quietly into some forgotten place. But then she looked at Eun-ji curled against her side and seemed to reach a decision. 3 weeks ago, she began softly, I was assigned to clean Chairman Beck's private office after a political fundraiser. Her voice shook slightly from exhaustion, but she forced herself to continue. I heard people arguing behind the bookshelf. One man said the containers needed to leave Busan before customs inspections increased. Tae-woo exchanged a dark glance with Min-jae. So-ra swallowed hard. After they left, the bookshelf was still open. She closed her eyes briefly like someone trying to survive a memory. There were hidden monitors inside the room. Camera feeds from shipping containers. Her breathing became uneven. Children, dozens of them. Even some of Beck's own workers shifted uncomfortably now. Nobody wanted to look directly at her. I recorded part of it with my phone, So-ra whispered. But one of Beck's executives saw me leaving the office. She looked toward Eun-ji again, her expression breaking apart completely for the first time. I knew they would never let us live after that. Min-jae slowly removed the silver flash drive from his coat pocket and held it between two fingers. This contains the recordings? So-ra nodded. And financial ledgers. Names. Politicians. Shipping routes. Enough to destroy everyone involved. Tae-woo exhaled sharply beneath his breath. That is why Beck is panicking. Min-jae stared quietly at the flash drive. Small. Simple. Yet capable of collapsing empires. Then suddenly So-ra looked directly at him with frightened urgency. You do not understand, she said. Chairman Beck is not only protecting the operation. Her voice dropped lower. He is preparing to eliminate you too. For the first time all night, Min-jae's expression changed slightly. The warehouse workers looked at each other nervously. So-ra continued carefully. I heard Beck say your organization had become too independent. He planned to frame you after the next shipment investigation. Tae-woo's face hardened instantly. That old snake. Min-jae remained completely still, calm on the outside. But inside, something cold began unfolding piece by piece. Chairman Beck had not simply been exploiting children. He had been preparing a betrayal large enough to erase Kang Min-jae from Seoul permanently. And suddenly the harbor no longer felt like a rescue mission. It felt like the beginning of a war. By sunrise, Seoul already felt different. News stations began reporting sudden investigations into several companies connected to Chairman Beck's shipping empire. Tax agencies arrived at corporate offices before employees even finished their morning coffee. Customs officials halted containers at Busan Harbor. Financial regulators froze accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And somewhere high above the city, inside a glass penthouse overlooking the Han River, Chairman Beck Du-shik realized someone had started dismantling his empire piece by piece. Kang Min-jae stood silently beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private office while television screens flickered across the room. Politicians denied connections. Executives stopped answering calls. Lawyers panicked. The beautiful illusion Chairman Beck spent 30 years building was beginning to crack under the weight of its own secrets. Han Tae-woo entered carrying another tablet full of updates. 3 shipping directors disappeared before dawn, he reported. 2 prosecutors are already cooperating after seeing the files. Min-jae remained expressionless. And Beck, Tae-woo allowed himself the faintest smile. For the first time in 20 years, nobody is returning his calls. Across the room, Yoon So-ra sat quietly on a leather sofa while Eun-ji slept against her shoulder beneath a soft gray blanket provided by the staff. The little girl had finally stopped trembling sometime around 4 in the morning after realizing nobody was chasing them anymore. So-ra gently brushed hair away from her daughter's forehead and looked toward Min-jae carefully. "Why are you helping us?" she asked softly. Min-jae did not answer immediately. Outside the windows, helicopters drifted above the skyline while the first pale sunlight touched the river below. "Because someone should have helped my mother once," he said finally. The room went silent. Tae-woo looked down respectfully. In 11 years working beside Min-jae, he had never heard the boss mention family. Not once. So-ra studied him differently after that. Not like a feared mafia figure. Not even like a powerful man. Just someone carrying old scars beneath expensive suits and cold silence. Then suddenly one of the television channels changed to breaking news. A government spokesperson appeared beside police investigators while reporters shouted questions in every direction. Authorities have confirmed evidence related to human trafficking operations connected to Beck International Shipping. So-ra covered her mouth in shock. Tae-woo slowly lowered the tablet in his hands. But Min-jae's attention stayed fixed on only one thing. Chairman Beck himself stepping out of a black sedan, surrounded by cameras outside the National Prosecutor's office. Even now, the old man wore an immaculate suit and perfectly combed silver hair. He looked more annoyed than afraid. Men like Beck always believed power would save them eventually. Min Jae turned away from the television and reached for his coat. Tae-woo immediately understood. "Boss," he said carefully. "If you go there personally, every camera in Seoul will see it." Min Jae slid the coat over his shoulders without hesitation. Good. 30 minutes later, rain began falling lightly again over downtown Seoul as black sedans pulled quietly beside the prosecutor's building. Reporters instantly froze when Kang Min-jae stepped onto the sidewalk. The atmosphere changed immediately. Cameras turned. Security officers stiffened. Even Chairman Beck stopped walking for one brief second. The two men faced each other across flashing lights and falling rain. One old empire collapsing, another standing perfectly still in front of it. Chairman Beck slowly forced a smile for the cameras. "You think this ends with me?" he asked quietly once Min Jae approached close enough. Min Jae looked at him without emotion. "No," he replied softly. "I think it begins with you." For the first time since this nightmare started, Chairman Beck's smile disappeared completely. Winter arrived early in Seoul that year. 3 months after Chairman Beck's empire collapsed, the city moved on the way powerful cities always do. News stations found new scandals. Politicians denied old friendships. Expensive restaurants reopened their private rooms for men who pretended they had never known Beck Du-shik existed at all. But for Yoon So-rae and Eun-ji, life no longer felt like something they had to survive hour by hour. A small noodle shop near the edge of the Han River became their new beginning. The place was modest. Warm yellow lights. Wooden tables polished by hand. Steam rising from bowls of homemade broth, while soft jazz played through an old speaker near the kitchen. Nothing luxurious. Nothing dangerous. Just peaceful. On snowy evenings, office workers stopped in for hot meals while students crowded near the windows laughing over shared plates of dumplings. Most customers never recognized the quiet woman behind the counter as someone who once held evidence capable of destroying half of Seoul's elite. And So-rae preferred it that way. Eun-ji especially loved the snow. Every morning before school, she pressed her nose against the restaurant windows searching for the first flakes drifting across the river. For the first time in months, she slept through the night without waking from nightmares. No more hiding. No more running. One evening just before Christmas, snow began falling heavily outside while So-rae cleaned the last empty table near closing time. Eun-ji sat at the counter drawing pictures beside a bowl of untouched noodles. "Mom," she whispered suddenly, "the black car is back." So-rae froze. Her eyes slowly lifted toward the street outside. Across the road beneath glowing street lights, a familiar black sedan sat quietly beside the curb while snow gathered softly across the hood. Her heartbeat stumbled for one brief second. Kang Min-jae sat alone inside the vehicle, one hand resting against the steering wheel as warm light from the noodle shop reflected faintly across the window beside him. No bodyguards tonight. No convoy. No dark suits. Surrounding him like armor. Just one man sitting silently in the falling snow. Eun-ji immediately jumped from the stool. "Can I go say hi?" So-rae hesitated. The old fear still existed somewhere deep inside her. Not fear of Min Jae himself anymore, but fear of the dangerous world attached to him. Yet when she looked through the window again, the feared Mafia Boss no longer looked untouchable. He looked tired, alone, like someone who had spent his entire life carrying storms inside his chest. Finally, she gave a small nod. Eun-ji pushed open the restaurant door and ran across the snowy sidewalk wearing her oversized winter coat. Min Jae looked genuinely surprised when she suddenly climbed into the passenger seat beside him with a bright smile. Through the fogged glass, So-rae watched the little girl speak excitedly while waving her hands around dramatically. And slowly, almost reluctantly, Kang Min-jae smiled back. It was small, brief, but real. A few minutes later, the restaurant door opened again. Min Jae stepped inside quietly while melting snow slid from the shoulders of his dark coat. Conversations around the room faded almost instantly. Some customers recognized him immediately. Others simply felt the shift in atmosphere powerful people carried wherever they went. But Min Jae ignored the attention completely. His eyes settled only on So-rae, standing behind the counter. Eunji says your noodles are the best in Seoul, he said softly. Soare stared at him for a moment before the faintest smile touched her face. She exaggerates. No, Eunji interrupted proudly from behind him. I do not. The room laughed gently. And somehow, for the first time in many years, Kang Min-jae laughed too. Outside, snow continued falling quietly across Seoul, while warm lights spilled from the tiny noodle shop onto the frozen sidewalk. And in that small, ordinary place beside the river, a man feared by an entire city finally remembered what it felt like to be human again.